ranking the top 10 tight ends in the 2025 NFL Draft today. Welcome back to another video on the Winning Browns podcast. And today we're going to be talking about who are the best tight ends to pick in this year's NFL Draft. And the tight end position is very selective position. It really depends on what type of tight end you want, and that's especially the case with this year's draft. Um, this honestly is one looks to be, in my opinion, at the very least, one of the most impactful. One of the most impactful positions in the draft, but also one of the most impactful years for the tight end position in the history of the NFL because of the rare skill sets we're seeing out of a lot of tight ends. I think this is one of the year there are few players at the top of this list who are especially versatile enough to change the position permanently. And we'll get to who those guys are, but this is a really, really good tight end class, really solid. Maybe not a lot of high end elite players, but a lot of guys who can at the top of the board change the position. And we'll start off by going with the do it all tight ends, guys like Tyler Warren and Harold Fannin, who we will especially get to. Those guys, I mean, these are not just guys who can play inline, outline, outside boundary tight end, but these are guys who can play within the H-back position. They can play wide receiver. Some of them, in the case of Tyler Warren, he can play running back. He can play, like a gadget receiver, kind of like an Isaiah McKenzie or something like that. Tyler Warren's even played as a quarterback and a center, which just goes to show you his overall versatility. And I think what the tight end position can be in the near future. I think Tyler Warren really exaggerates the future of that position and his overall skill set we will get to later on. But you also got Harold Fannin, who is probably the most productive tight end in the league in all of college football this past year. He had over 1,500 receiving yards, and granted, that was against, for the most part, lesser competition. But with that exception, I mean, Tyler Warren is a guy who could play pretty much any receiver position. He can play in the slot. He can play outside as a wide receiver. He's got the instincts of a running back. He's an extremely effective blocker. I think that really, that's the type of versatility that a lot of teams in the NFL value from the tight end position. It's the reason why a guy like Travis Kelce is so valued, even though Kelce is not particularly the most effective blocker out there. And you talk about a guy who can pretty much run his own routes like Travis Kelce. Harold Fannin does exactly that. And for that reason, I think that Harold Fannin definitely should be getting his flowers. And then we got other guys such as Caden Prieskorn. Caden Prieskorn, I think, is very underrated. I think Caden Prieskorn is a guy who can not only play the wide tight end, but also has strong blocking ability. He has great ability as far as playing all three levels as a receiver. And he also has a lot of value as a special teams player. He's great as far as an inline player. He can play in the H-back. And I think that's especially a theme with this entire tight end draft class. The fact that guys overall, you're talking about guys overall who can play the H-back position, which is really rare in this day and age in the NFL. Most teams don't have an H-back. That's really kind of more exclusive to college football teams and specifically that air raid system. But we're starting to see that air raid system be more common in the NFL. You look at it like a Cliff Kingsbury offense, and even Andy Reid has implemented certain parts of the air raid offense within his own system and to help a guy like Patrick Mahomes. I think Prieskorn fits. Maliki Matavayo is another guy who I am really high on for this reason. Actually, Maliki Matavayo kind of fits in multiple categories in this position, and for that reason, I have him a little bit higher on the overall list than Caden Prieskorn. But he is a solid receiver, and I think he's exactly what a lot of teams are looking for as far as a receiver, as far as being able to create his own routes and being able to create his own yards after the catch. I think he's one of the best in the draft when it comes to that type of thing. He's also extremely big. You're talking about a guy who's 6'6", 260 pounds, just an absolute mammoth of a human being. And his fluidity in zone coverage, in spite of that, is really, kind of um, it reminds me of a lot more veteran tight ends. Look at Tony Gonzalez at the end of his career. You look at a guy like um, the tight end who played for the Packers for a long time, Jared Cook, very similar to that. And then you talk about his frame and as far as being able to, high point the football. At the end of the day, he's also, a guy who can still be able to get yards after the catch, even though he's not per se the most effective at that. Um, Very much a safety blanket, in my opinion, for a lot of different quarterbacks, and his red zone ability is definitely going to be very useful. However, I do think that his change of direction ability is going to limit him as far as his overall receiving prowess at the next level. And then we got Gavin Bartholomew, who I think for the most part is very much a role player in any sort of offense that he is put into. He is extremely fast, extremely athletic for his size, being 6'5", 250, and being able to move like that. I think that was warrant of being able to put him at this position. And again, he's also one of those guys who's very versatile, can play the fullback, H-back, inline tight end, slot receiver, boundary receiver. He's got a lot of scheme flexibility there. And then you combine his overall strength, his ability to feel zone coverage, and his overall ability to, kind of use his strength against press. I think that's extremely effective. He's got great leverage as a blocker. Really, what it comes down to is kind of just overall that top end speed, that overall like separation, that athleticism. And then, he's not exactly great when it comes to reliability when it comes to his hands. And that's why I don't have him that much higher. But on paper, he definitely looks the part. And I think that was worth putting him on this list. And then we got blocking tight ends. Gunnar Helm is the best blocker in this draft. If you're talking pure blocking tight ends, he fit really well in that Texas offense specifically for that reason. And I think that Gunnar Helm is a guy who, as good of a passer he is, he's going to be relied on more, especially early on in his career as a blocker as far as sealing the edge goes. He's a guy who can really play even tackle if you wanted him to. And he's got versatility. He's even like a defensive type, hard-hitting guy. He is nasty as far as getting into the second level and being able to recognize linebackers and how they move and being able to adjust his footwork accordingly, which really kind of impressed me off the tape. Even for how much of heavy feet he has. As far as just overall pass protection goes, he is flawless. There's nothing really I can say about him. It really comes down to his just overall play strength as a receiving, traditional like inline wide tight end. Obviously, his route tree is very limited. He kind of relies on crossers, out routes, seams. And his footwork is very, very sloppy in my hands. And like I said, he's very reliant on his heavy feet, which kind of limits his overall hip movement and his hip flexibility. And then, his hand placement overall, just as both a blocker and a receiver, that's something that just needs a lot of work on. And I think that's going to limit him as far as an overall 3-down tight end. And he's just not the most athletic guy when it comes to that overall. So for that reason, I think he's better suited as a blocker than he is as a receiver. And personally, I would draft him as a blocker. Not to say that he doesn't have receiving capabilities, but I do think that his best role in the NFL is as a blocker. And for that reason, he's the only blocking tight end that I thought was worth being on this list. There are other guys in the league who can be blocking tight ends, but Gunnar Helm was the only one who I thought would be a long-term starter, or not a long-term starter, but a long-term player in the NFL. I do think he has starting capabilities, but more as a overall, 5, 6, 7 year career in the NFL. He's one of those guys who I can see being longer than the average NFL career at the tight end position. Then you got guys as far as the receiving game. I was a little conflicted, to be honest with you, as far as where I put some of these guys. Colston Loveland it kind of goes against my own grain as far as what I prioritize as far as a tight end overall, especially a receiving tight end, a guy who has a concerning history as far as drops go. Colston Loveland, as far as route running goes, he's probably the best route running tight end in the entire draft, right? You're talking about a guy who creates separation with just his overall amazing timing and his overall ability to, understand where he needs to get off on his break when it comes to his stem. But overall, I think the big problems I had with him, especially the Penn State game, that Penn State game was extremely awful as far as just kind of focus drops that really come as far as his ability. He's trying more to focus on yards after catch than securing the catch. And I think he's got to focus more on just um, finding that open area in the field and just relying on his hands more and just not worrying about what happens afterwards. Um, but I don't see that being that much of a problem because he's very quick at processing and he's great at finding zone coverage. So as long as he can get in that open spot, it doesn't seem like that really hurts him. I mean, he's still fantastic hands catcher. He's got great catch radius, and he's able to make catches that most other receivers aren't able to. His ball tracking skills aren't particularly that impressive, but he can high point the football as much as needed, and that's not really his game. He's you compare a guy like Gronk versus a guy like Travis Kelsey, where Gronk was a guy who was very much more go and make the impressive contested catch, and Kelsey's more of make your route, find the open space, and then just make a play after that fact. Colston Loveland is the latter. He's more like Kelsey than he is Gronk, and he does have the ability to still box out in tight coverage. He's got a basketball background, so he can jump like crazy. And you talk about a sub 4.740. I think that's kind of that speed is helps him as far as relying as a yards after catch tight end. But you would add in his versatility as far as the receiving position, inline, slot, and wide receiver. I think he is the best receiver as far as route running goes in this entire draft. He can play pretty much any wide receiver position. He can play gadget. You talk about a guy who can work on end arounds. Colston Loveland has that ability. Very synonymous to a Brock Bowers last year for that same reason. I like Colston Loveland a lot there. And at the end of the day, he played in a blocking heavy scheme with Michigan. They run the football a lot. And obviously, he was still able to work in that department as far as pass protection goes. Obviously, with his own skill set, I think he's best suited for a team that works on passing the ball a lot, especially to a tight end. I'm not saying that necessarily he's going to be bad in a run game. Obviously, he, was on a team that was in a run heavy scheme, but he's more suited as far as pass protection goes, as far as setting the edge goes. And he can still be able to work as far as the second and third level as being able to help blocks for running backs. So I think overall, there's not many problems I see as far as the blocking game goes. I think they're overplayed. However, his technique still needs work, right? And I think that's going to be the main reason why I think he should stay as a receiving tight end more than he is a blocking tight end. And then we got guys, Terrence Ferguson and Elijah Roy are pretty much the same player in my opinion. Arroyo has more injury concerns, and for that reason, I had him a little bit lower. Otherwise, I mean, Arroyo is, I'd say, a little bit more talented, but these two guys are really the same exact player. They're the good parts about their game and the bad parts about their game are quite literally the same. Arroyo has, developing play strength as far as function, but he's still kind of, as far as raw strength goes, he's probably one of the best. He's a great route runner, great great as far as extending his frame away from catches. His catch radius is just a mismatch against anybody he goes against. Being a guy who is 6'5", 250 pounds, you're talking about a guy who can play on all three levels of the football. He is extremely fast, and you talk about a guy who can make yards after the catch. Arroyo is that, but Ferguson, in my opinion, has a better feel for zone coverage and different types of schemes. Anything that someone throws at him, I think he's better suited for. What it really comes down to, however, against um, Ferguson, which really concerns me, is you got to be more nuanced on those routes. He's not exactly meticulous as far as understanding and recognizing when to break off on the stem and just being able to run a specific angle. That's something that's got to be worked on. I think that can be coached on, especially his ability to run crossing routes and just feel zone coverage. But his both of these guys are not good at press coverage. I'd say Arroyo is a lot worse when it comes to that, in spite of the fact that he's stronger, which in my opinion gives him more potential. But Ferguson, he's already there and he's a little bit older, a little bit more experienced when it comes to that. And then you add in the fact that he doesn't have as much of an injury history as Arroyo. I think it was better put to have him higher than Arroyo for that reason. And then you got Aronde Gadsden, who I think is a worse receiving tight end here, but he's better suited for a receiving tight end position. That's why I put him a little bit lower. I actually have him higher because I think he's a better blocker than both Ferguson and Arroyo, and we'll get to that. His blocking technique is not exactly good, and he's not exactly great as far as his change of direction. But his injury history is a lot, it's a lot better than these two guys, Ferguson and Arroyo. More Arroyo than Ferguson because Ferguson was still able to play a lot. But you're talking about a guy who, as far as his overall speed, his overall raw athleticism, and his overall ability to just be reliable as a catcher and as a chain mover, I think Aronde Gadsden has exactly what you're looking for in a tight end. Really, what it comes down to is just the overall fact that because of his lack of changing directions, and he's more of a kind of he's more reliant on the stem than he is in the break, and he's not exactly great as far as yards after catch go. I think that limits him as far as a receiver goes compared to Ferguson and Arroyo. But I do think that he is still, without a doubt, one of the better tight ends in this draft. And then you got excuse me, Mitchell Evans, Jake Bieringstool, and Thomas Fidone, inline tight ends at their finest, especially Mitchell Evans. Very much a prototypical tight end too. Huge, 260 pounds, and still pretty athletic for that matter, running a 4.7 40. His body control is probably one of the best in this entire draft class, and that's why I really like him as far as his receiving ability. But I don't think he's per se the best as far as footwork. His injury history is extremely concerning, and he doesn't lack creativity when it comes to after the catch ability. But his ability to recognize, man zone press coverage and being able to adapt accordingly is extremely rare as far as tight ends I've seen. He's extremely smart, especially in the medium and deep receiving situations. He's able to use his size really well, which kind of makes him a safety blanket for a lot of quarterbacks at the next level. You're talking about a guy who is extremely physical in the blocking game. He's got great leverage, and he's continuously able to use his legs even after the snap. For that reason, I think that Mitchell Evans is better suited to be more of a blocker than a receiver, but because of his still receiving game off of the inline position, and then working as far as both an H-back and then slot alignments, I think that versatility helps him more as an inline tight end. But you need to rely more on his blocking ability. For that reason, I think he's better suited as far as, that George Kittle type tight end. And then he's just one of the toughest when it comes to just making tough catches, making tough blocks, playing through, injuries and hard hits, and being able to reach out for balls that he knows he's going to get hit on, especially. And for that reason, I like Mitchell Evans a lot as far as the number one inline tight end. Jake Bieringstool, I'm not as big on because I do think that he is severely limited as a blocker from the sense that he doesn't have the functional strength to be able to gain leverage. And he is very underweight for a tight end of his relative height, being 6'6". Very kind of lean, not exactly what you look for as a tight end. But as far as his overall route running from the inline position, I think he's better suited as that. He recognizes coverage well. And as far as a red zone threat, I think he's better suited to be an inline tight end for that reason. The reason why I still have him as an inline tight end is because when he still blocks, he's able to help in the run game at the very least, get chips, kind of do a little bit of the dirty work. And I think that's going to be especially more the case at the next level. He's also a guy who I don't think per se has the best hands while catching in traffic, which doesn't exactly help him as far as a receiver. He relies more on finding open open spaces and then just making tough catches using his size. And for that reason, I think he's better suited to play inside from a slot, or play inside as maybe an H back and get receiving yards, kind of like a Kyle Juszczyk in that same way. Um, Maybe not necessarily play that traditional H back or inline tight end position, kind of more in flexible scheme where tight ends are moving around a lot more. I think for that reason he'd be great for a Kyle Shanahan esque system, um, as kind of in the same role that Jordan Reed played a few years back when they had him. But I think at the end of the day, Beringstool's athleticism and his overall speed and his overall ability to recognize and being able to adapt accordingly in the blocking game still gives him some ability as far as an inline tight end. It's really just about kind of building up that play strength as far as a blocker, which I don't think is it's easier said than done. But I think Beringstool's overall skill set kind of works in favor of him as far as just playing more of a slot receiver. And because he doesn't have per se the best hands, I think he's better suited as far as maybe even playing a slot receiver, maybe not an inline tight end, but definitely playing a lot more in line than the average receiver. And then Thomas Fidone, I kind of just put here because he's a reliable kind of receiver. He's definitely got one of the best frames as far as just 30, great wingspan, 30 plus inch wingspan, or 30 plus inch arms, excuse me. And you're talking about massive hands, 11, almost nearly 11-inch hands. His catch rate is ridiculous. And he can make receivers look better, or quarterbacks look better than they are. Obviously, his frame and his ability to catch balls away from his frame in spite of contact, especially in the intermediate route running game. I think that kind of is really his bread and butter. Really, what it comes down to is he has a huge injury history, and he doesn't have the play strength to be able to play consistently against edge defenders. To me, his receiving game is more reliant on inline schemes, but you're talking about a guy who really needs to work on his overall balance as far as a blocker. And then, really, why I don't have him a lot higher, the reason why I was kind of skeptical of even putting him on this list is purely because of the fact that he is not exactly the greatest processor when it comes to processing speed. He's not exactly great at recognizing what's happening on the field pre-snap, and being able to adapt. And for that reason, I just think really he's just more of an athletic freak, and I'm really even skeptical on saying that he will last in the NFL more than 2-3 seasons. But I still think he can be a reliable piece for a Super Bowl contender for several reasons. And then when you look at the boundary tight ends, a guy who was on the receiving video for the same reason was Jack Betch, who I think I said in that video is better suited as far as a tight end, as far as his overall blocking ability, as far as his size goes, and I put him on that list for that reason. And I think he is the number 2 boundary tight end for that reason. But overall, I think the guy who really stands out head and shoulders above everyone on this list is Mason Taylor. Mason Taylor being just one of the best route runners in this entire draft. As an LSU student, getting to go to a couple games, getting to see him live, and getting to see him in several other games on TV, the Ole Miss game, the South Carolina game, and is what he can do after the catch is nothing short of phenomenal. For that reason, I think Mason Taylor just stands head and shoulders above everyone else. And then we're going to go to other guys like Brian Nesbitt, I think another guy who didn't make this list, who could have easily been mentioned, Brant Queeth, tight end from Utah. But the guys I ended up going with are Jalen Conyers because of his athleticism overall. He's got above average speed. He ran a 4.68 40 at the 40-yard dash at the combine. You're talking about a guy who can definitely break a lot of tackles. He did a lot more early on in his career in 2022. Broke 21 missed tackles, which was the most by any FBS tight end. He's a very versatile player, and you're talking about a guy who, with his size, can still kind of be able to make linebackers and safeties miss. He's one of those guys who's very much kind of too 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 fast for linebackers, too big for safeties. And then you talk about his overall versatility, playing as a wildcat, playing as an inline, playing as a slot. You got a lot of guys who can throw the ball as far as tight ends in this draft, and I think that is going to be definitely helpful for moving the offense as far as evolution goes in the NFL to a whole new level. That's why I'm really excited for that. But I just don't think, as far as his inline tight end position, he's still very much developing is that he's really more reliant on his red zone ability and his overall route running ability. I think he can very much be developed into an inline tight end, but what you're looking for as far as those first 3-4 years before he gets on into a second contract is someone who's very much reliant on his abilities as far as a boundary receiver goes. And then Brian Nesbitt, fantastic route runner, just doesn't got the greatest hands on the planet. For that reason, I had him low. I was really questioning even putting him on this list, but I ended up doing so anyways. But he's the last of the boundary tight ends who I ended up putting on this list. But then going on to the actual list, we're going to go at number 10. We're going to go with Caden Prieskorn. As I mentioned, Caden Prieskorn, I do think is a better do-it-all tight end than Moliki Matavayo. But I think Moliki Matavayo, as far as his overall receiving ability, is going to be valued a lot more by NFL teams and going to be utilized a lot better as far as what he can do in the modern NFL. Prieskorn is more of a traditional tight end in that department. Prieskorn, at the end of the day, he is still very much raw as far as what he can do, relying on his overall athleticism, size, and frame. He can play different positions, as I mentioned, in line, in the slot, H-back, and his special teams ability, I think, definitely helps him as far as an overall player. If we're talking about just overall players, I would draft. If I'm looking, I'm always looking for a do-it-all tight end player. Given the fact that how valued they are in the modern day NFL as far as blocking, receiving goes, I think they should be paid a lot more for that department. I would pick Prieskorn over Matavayo, but I do think at the end of the day, I think Prieskorn has a lower ceiling than Matavayo because of the fact that while his athleticism is, very much reliant on his size, his kind of ability to, at 6'6", nearly 260 pounds, still able to run 4.7. I think his game speed very much is different from his actual 40-yard speed. He's not great as far as overall separation goes. He needs to kind of work on his route running and being able to better create separation at the top of his routes. He's not a great vertical threat, which, as far as a red zone threat, is something I'm always looking for. And his footwork and hand placement, just very limited. As a blocker, I would like to see a lot more. And for that reason, I think Prieskorn has a lot lower ceiling than other guys at his position. As far as number 9 goes, we're going to go with Moliki Matavayo for this reason. However, being the guy who can recognize modern day zone coverages, I think he's better suited for this day and age. He's got a better overall ability as far as yards after catch. Like I said, he's not as good as far as doing everything as Prieskorn, but what it really comes down for Matavayo is because of his receiving prowess. I think he's going to be better suited to a lot more schemes in this day and age. He's a better chain remover. You're talking about a guy who, as far as medium range routes go, he can catch the ball and just go pretty much to the entire house. 6'6", really can kind of box out defenders, kind of like a rebound, as far as rebounding a basketball, kind of like Dennis Rodman in that same way. You're talking about a guy who can find windows that most other tight ends can't. and his overall spatial awareness is definitely rare in this draft class. A guy who can get very much physical, fight for extra yards, but again, his technique needs refinement. His overall ability against man coverage is very limited, and I'm still questioning that he's not going to be as great as far as press coverage. He's not great as far as technicality in his route running goes, and he's relying more on just kind of finding the open space than actually creating a route. And then, of course, both him and Prescorn have different change of direction abilities. Matavayo is more limited in that, but because he's still able to, kind of be physical and still able to get yards after catch, I don't think that's going to be that much of a problem. I still think that coaches can kind of work on that a little bit more. He's still got better footwork than Prescorn, and for that reason, I have Matavayo at number 9. At number 8, we're going to go with Gunnar Helm. Like I said, he's a great blocker. He's a great receiver, but he's really reliant on his blocking ability. And that's really why I don't have him much higher than number 8. What it really comes down to with Gunnar Helm is the fact that he doesn't have the play strength to play the traditional wide tight end role, in spite of the fact that he needs to be a blocking tight end based on what his game kind of promotes him to be. If he plays against stronger defensive ends at the NFL level, he's going to be crushed. Really, I can't put it any more blunt way. His average, he has very average speed, which means that he's not going to be great as far as taking off the top on a defensive route, meaning he's very limited to just short and intermediate routes, which doesn't exactly work for him given the fact that he has a very limited route tree. And I think that can be worked on. He's got great separation, but at the end of the day, a guy with that limited athleticism is just not going to work at the next level to that type of degree. And I think that kind of limits his overall ceiling. And for that reason, I think that most teams who draft him are kind of looking at just a 1 or 2 down tight end. He's more of a tight end 2 than he is a tight end 1. And for that reason, I have him at number 8. At number 7, we're going to go with Elijah Royo. Like I said, if it wasn't for his injury history, he would be a lot higher on this list. I would probably say he's closer to 5 or 4, maybe. He is extremely athletic. We're talking about a guy who ran a 4.6 40. He's big. He knows how to box out. He's a safety blanket type player for a lot of quarterbacks. You're talking about a guy who is the modern age tight end. He can run routes really well. He's got great hands. He can catch away from his frame. Really, what it comes down to is he's not the greatest blocker, which limits his ability to be a full-on do-it-all tight end. But his ability to recognize zone, man, and press coverage and play against it in any sort of way is flawless. Really, what it comes down to is I don't know if I would draft him with his, loaded injury history. You're talking about a guy who has had multiple seasons, kind of derailed by a left knee, including this past season. I'm not exactly sure with his production. It was really hard to even find tape for this guy. We're really talking about only 1 year of high-level performance. And while he definitely made Cam Ward look a lot better than he should have, in my opinion, when he was on the field, again, the overall ability that he's not on the field a lot really makes me question how reliable is he as an overall player who can play every down in football. And like they say, the best ability is availability. And for that reason, I cannot put him higher than 7. I would like to. I really like this guy. If his injury history gets better, believe me, he's going to be a top 5 tight end in this draft class. He could be maybe number 3. I don't know. But for now, I think he stands at number 7 for that reason. At number 6, like I said, Ferguson's just a little bit higher because he doesn't have the injury history. Ferguson's very much the same exact player as a Royo, a little less athletic, but he is a number 6 for that reason. And I don't really have much to say. Everything that I said about Roy, you can pretty much just copy and paste for those same reasons. What it really comes down to is that they're both very limited as far as their overall blocking ability goes. But we're talking about a guy who's not nearly as nuanced as far as his overall route running, which is why I put him at 6 instead of maybe a top 5 tight end position. Like I said, Rondell Gadsden, I think he is a better receiver than these guys and still a better, as far as a blocker goes, does enough that other teams are going to be more suited to draft him higher in the draft, and expect more out of him for that reason. His overall receiving ability, I think, makes him more valued for other teams. The fact that he's still able to block at a high level means that I can still expect everything I want to out of a Ronda Gadsden. His athleticism is one of the best in this entire draft class. We're talking about great footwork, great separation, hands that are extremely reliable. You're talking about a guy who has 34-inch arms, an 82-inch wingspan, 6'5" frame, great size there. Can run routes on all three levels. That's the type of receiving. That's the type of receiving prowess that is rare in this draft class. Really, what it comes down to is his change direction is not exactly great. He's more of a build-up on the stems than he is trying to get yards after the catch per se. And his blocking technique needs a lot of work. But I think these are things that can definitely be coached a lot better at the next level, which is why I have him a lot higher than these other guys, in spite of the fact that I think he's a worse do-it-all tight end. His receiving game really stands out above everybody else. So for that reason, I have him at number 5. At number 4 goes, I'm going to go with Colston Loveland. To me, this is probably the biggest boomer bust prospect at the tight end position. Like I said, great in both the run and block game, but his blocking technique needs a lot of work. He's not a great blocker whatsoever as far as overall being coached at that. However, I think that the best offenses that are suited for him are, teams like the Los Angeles Chargers. Great quarterback. They can throw the ball a lot with a Justin Herbert, but they're more suited for the run game. I think it coaches him to be an overall do-it-all tight end rather than just relying on his receiving game. I know Jim Harbaugh will definitely be after a guy like him, being that he has Michigan connections, but he also plays a lot like Vernon Davis, a tight end who thrived under Jim Harbaugh, a guy who can create separation and be able to box out and be able to make uncanny plays for any tight end, and then being able to do anything at the tight end position as far as receiving goes, and being able to recognize zone coverage. His processing ability kind of stands out above everybody else, and I think that's going to help him at the next level, is being able to recognize things that most tight ends at a young age won't be able to. But what really stands out for me is his separation game. I think that he is extremely raw as far as blocking, but because he has enough, it'll still work. If he can get the focus drops out of his game, which don't seem to be as much, it seemed to be more this year, which is when he had worse quarterback play, I think he could be great at the next level. It really just comes down to who ends up drafting him at the end of the day. Again, like I said, I can be very much wrong about this. I can be very much wrong about how good he is or how bad he is. I don't know, but for that reason, I'm just going to be safe and put him at number 4 rather than put him at per se number 2. Number 3, I'm going to go with Mason Taylor. Like I said, he's the best receiving tight end in this draft class. His ability to play any type of receiving position, his yards after catch, his ability to create separation, his play strength as far as a receiver, his ability to recognize man, zone, and press coverage, and being able to adapt his breaks and stems accordingly are things that you don't see. His footwork is phenomenal. That's the type of stuff that for a tight end in this day and age where you expect more as far as a receiver, I think a lot of teams look at that. You look at what Ben Johnson looked at as far as Sam Laporta. Mason Taylor has that. His athleticism at the position still makes him extremely reliable for that reason, and he's got reliable hands. So I don't think that there's much to say bad as far as Mason Taylor as a receiver. Really comes down to the fact he has no experience as a blocker, but he's got strength to play as a blocker if he needs to. It's just about the fact that he just lacks that type of experience. Really what it comes down to is his anchor is just terrible against power rushers. He's going to be just kind of mauled in that, and really his technical ability as a run blocking, he plays way too high. He gets overwhelmed at the point of attack. I think he can be coached, but I don't think that's going to be his bread and butter. At the end of the day, this is a league that more relies on a receiving tight end more than a blocking tight end. If you ask me 20 years, he'd probably be a lot lower than he is today. But now I think they're going to get the most out of him. For that reason, I have him at number 3. Now we're going to get to the 2 guys who I really like in this draft class. Harold Fannin is number 2. Harold Fannin, I don't understand why he's not getting talked about more as a first-round tight end. I think he is going to be a first round player, and I think he's going to be a top 20 player if it comes down to it, just based on his ability. I would be shocked if no team gets him as far as a top two tight end. This is a guy who's got flawless hands. He's had two drops on just 171 career targets, right? This is a guy who, mind you, is 21 years old. He has been the center point of a Bowling Green offense pretty much since the first day he set foot on campus. Led the league in receptions, led the league in receiving yards as a tight end, first ever in FBS history. This is not a guy that you see often at all. He should be a top 20 player. Very effective blocker in spite of the fact that he's not, the biggest tight end. He's great leverage, great technique. He's got great footwork as both a blocker and a receiver, which helps him maintain a great base, which helps him maintain great route running and great technicality as far as being able to bait a cornerback and then being able to get separation afterwards, and then even being able to get yards after contact. His change of direction ability in this is flawless. You're talking about a guy who can line up really at any position. He can pretty much play all 11 positions on the football field if you wanted him to. Actually, I take that back. Maybe 10. Can't play quarterback. Play any offensive line position from center to tackle. You're talking about a guy who can play inline, outline, tight end, boundary. He can play the X, Y, Z receiver position. He can play as a gadget. He can play in the slot. There's nothing he can't do. And he's got great abilities even far as a defender and a special teams player. That's what I really like about him. Even now a lot of people will say that, he didn't play against great competition. Well, when he played against the best competition, against top 25 teams in 2024, he averaged 141 yards per game. So I cannot tell you that what to say. I cannot argue with you if you're going to tell me that he's not great against top competition. That's just not true. You're talking about a guy who averaged 13.3 yards per catch after his ability, a guy who makes big play after big play, great in the red zone, great at finding soft spots in zone coverage. Really what it comes down to is just the fact that he's not that big. He's very undersized, and his limited play strength he's very raw. But I think that's partially because he's playing against a lot bigger and more experienced players, especially playing in the MAC where players play usually 4 or 5 seasons. But really what it comes down to is, in spite of his size, he is still able to do everything that a tight end needs to do. So I really don't see a flaw in that. And he can get bigger. He's going to get bigger. He's going to put on more muscle at the next level. He's able to box out really well for a tight end, and he's a great route runner. So I really think that he's one of those guys who can really change the position and move it into the next level. And for that reason, in any other draft class, he would be number one. Number one. Well, maybe not last year's, but for most draft classes, he would be number one. Harold Fannin is that good. Put some respect on his name. He's going to be a big name come NFL draft time, and I think he is going to be one of the best tight ends in the league in a very short amount of time. Harold Fannin is one of my favorite players in this draft class, and I think he's going to be very good at the next level. But at number one, I'm going to go with Tyler Warren. Tyler Warren is everything Harold Fannin is, just a little bit better. Like I said, Harold Fannin can't play quarterback. Tyler Warren can. Tyler Warren has a bunch of snaps at the center position. As a snapper, he's great. There was a video, I forget who the YouTuber is, where he's breaking down his technique as far as a center, as far as his snapping ability, and then being able to put his hands out and push against nose tackles who are a lot bigger than him. He is bigger, a little bit more athletic than Tyler Warren, which kind of helps in his overall ability for that reason. Being able to run a 4.68 40, whereas Harold Fannin ran a 4.71. Being 6'6", 260, and still running like that. Sometimes my problem with him at times is that he plays a little smaller than what his position actually asks him. He's still raw as an inline blocker, but he's definitely got that type of potential. At times he can run a little bit too early in his routes. He can get a little bit trigger happy at pulling the trigger as far as being able to move. But his, fast twitch ability, I think that can actually help him as far as being the next level, as far as being just unpredictable overall, and other cornerbacks not knowing what to do particularly. As far as overall unpredictability, I don't think this is one of the tight ends. I don't think most people are going to know what he's doing. Very much like a Travis Kelce for those reasons. A guy who can run pretty much any route on the field. His IQ as a football player, both pre-snap and during the snap after he gets the ball, his ability to maintain leverage against defenders both in space and when trying to get a ball in the air is just nothing short of spectacular. His spatial awareness is second to none. Again, he can recognize both man, zone, and then on top of that, press coverage. He is There's nothing you can really do against him when it comes to his ability as far as 50-50 balls go. He is a red zone nightmare. His basketball background definitely shows there. This is a guy who can dunk and got a fantastic athleticism. You're talking about a guy who can run the ball very much as a running back, has the ability as far as being able to break tackles from the run game. He has reliable hands in traffic, really never drops the ball one bit, and is one of the most reliable move the chains receivers and one of the most efficient on third down. As far as just overall specificness for a receiver, he is great. He is the best day one tight end, and I think he has the best potential. I think Harold Fannin is a little more raw than him, and Fannin at times can make himself look to be as far as the best tight end in this draft. But what it really comes down to is the fact that Tyler Warren has things that Harold Fannin just can never get as far as his size, and he's a little bit faster at that size and a little bit more athletic. Tyler Warren can play all 11 positions on the field and kind of create his own positions at that. Tyler Warren, for that reason, is the number one tight end. And then on top of that, he's played against better competition already. I think for that reason, it makes him ready going into the NFL. For that reason, I think this is a guy who, from day one, is going to be, in talks of being an All-Pro tight end, and you're going to see that throughout his entire career. He has the makings of a guy who can play 10, 11 seasons minimum, let alone 15, and play them at a very high level. And for that reason, Tyler Warren is a guy who I look at going down as not just a Hall of Fame tight end, one of the greatest tight ends ever, and a guy who can change the tight end position forever, very much with Harold Fannin. And that is my list. Those are the guys who I think are the guys who can change the game, and those are the guys who I think are overall make the top 10 on this list. Again, comes down to number one, we got Tyler Warren. We got Harold Fannin at number 2. Number 3, Mason Taylor, Colston Loveland, Oronde Gadsden at 5, Terrence Ferguson, Elijah Arroyo, Gunnar Helm, Moliki Matavayo, and then Caden Prescorn at number 10. And then, of course, some of these guys differ as far as their rankings on this list as compared to where I categorize them and rank them in each category, because, again, certain tight ends are going to be valued more because of certain abilities than others. Guys like Oronde Gadsden and Moliki Matavayo compared to Caden Prescorn, Elijah Roy, and Terrence Ferguson, who are higher than him, not higher than them. A guy like Gunnar Helm, I would not be surprised if he's a lot higher. I got another guy who I would definitely keep a name on is Mitchell Evans, Jack Betch. Really comes down to which team drafts them for that reason and what they're looking for in them. They can definitely be a lot higher for those reasons. But yeah, this is a tight end position with a lot of guys who have a lot of different types of abilities and, can really move the needle as far as what the tight end position is at the next level and really make them a lot more valuable of a position if they aren't. And I'm really excited as far as the future of the tight end position because of this draft. But that's the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. We got more NFL draft videos coming in the near future. But until then, see you guys later. And that's that. Yep.